What's up, YouTube? My name is Desi, and my pronouns are she, her, and they, them. I've never done proper YouTube videos before, so we're gonna try this out. I plan on making this channel talking about different aspects of philosophy, psychology, religion, spirituality, experiences that I've had with and around and within each of these things. The hot topic of today was unexpected and unplanned, as well as an introduction, is going to be that today I have given up my membership of the Satanic Temple. I do not do this to appear libelous or slanderous. It was a calculated but angry decision that I made. Been frustrated at different points in the past with how leadership has been handled at the local as well as national leadership. At the risk of offending people, I'm gonna give some not so specific details, but I don't want to keep it too vague either. So these are my experiences, these are my opinions. I don't say this to attack anybody, I'm just talking based on how I feel. I don't speak for anybody except for myself, the communities with which I intersect, which are mostly queer and trans ones, as well as recovery communities. I also do not speak for them. I only speak for myself and my experiences. All of that being said, I want to give a quick flashback to 2019 when I lived in Ohio and I got involved with the Satanic Temple for the first time. It was cool. You know, we had some events, we did park cleanups, we did a lot of online stuff. Naturally, being the summer of 2019, things are still pretty new for that group at the time. We were what they call a friends of group, so we weren't a congregation yet. We were working towards that. You know, we did highway cleanups, we had a couple of barbecue type things, meeting at people's houses, building rapport, lots of online discussions. COVID happens, and we're all basically locked down. Through that, we ran a fundraiser and proved that we had what it took to become a full-fledged congregation. In the meantime, you know, I had issues. I've always had issues with authority. I'm an anarchist first, before I'm anything else. Except a trans person, of course. I wake up trans every day. I philosophically align with anarchism, and then my allegiances tend to go towards progressive groups, or what I think are progressive groups, until those groups no longer serve me or the direction that I'm going. To make a long story short, I've had disagreements, usually I considered respectful disagreements, with Ohio TST leadership at the time about how they handled certain things, particularly when it came to trans rights, because I'm a trans person and that shit matters to me. I got frustrated. I kind of stepped away, and that's about the time that Sober Faction was starting to become. It was a minor Facebook group, right? So we're talking April, May, June of 2020. There's a group of 200 people called Sober Faction. Well, it was Satanic Sober Faction at the time. It wasn't a TST thing. We'll come back to that. But it was comprised of mostly TST members, and it was started by members of TST. I'm gonna redact a lot of names. People can look these things up, and not all of it's all public, and a lot of it will be refuted. There's a lot of shit flinging right now. This is now a PG-13 channel because I said shit twice. So, Sober Faction starts. I am in the middle of my second relapse. I previously had a year and a half sober and then about 6 months sober, and I was like, I don't know if I want to be sober again. And Sober Faction comes into my Facebook feed, and I joined the group, and I attended a couple meetings. There were like 2 a week at the time. When I started, there wasn't one meeting. I think I started, and then like the next month we had our first meeting, and then we added a second. Now there are 15 or so, probably more. And I got directly involved, you know. I don't ever say that somebody saved my life. I saved my life. I made the decision to get sober again through Sober Faction, as well as working in AA program. For me, they do not conflict. I'm critical of both, you know, and I think in a responsible and respectful way. I can see where aspects of each of them work for different types of people and where they don't. And I'll probably be vocal about that sort of stuff as this channel develops. But at that point, I kind of knew where my loyalty lied. I wanted to do Sober Faction things. I went to a mix of AA and Sober Faction meetings for a year and a half, basically. And I got a good job, and I was keeping myself out of trouble. And I still had philosophical and political disagreements with people in the Ohio group. The main conflict I was experiencing at this time, I was preparing to become a meeting facilitator for Sober Faction. And there's a weird hierarchy in how TST is structured. I don't believe in hierarchies. I believe sometimes they're necessary, but they should be temporary. Most of them are arbitrary and end up becoming corrupt in some way. I feel like that's a fact of human history. And the point of all that is I apparently had pissed off some people. You know, I got accused of gatekeeping people out of Sober Faction from the Ohio group. They said they assumed that I was trying to keep people out when I was actually trying to protect the anonymity of folks and try to, you know, talk to people about their experiences. Like, I wasn't vetting people for Sober Faction. I just thought, you know, if I'm talking to people in the Ohio group who are asking about it and referring them in, I felt like I could do that. At the time, I was leading the moderator group for the Facebook group. We were called Mod Squad. We would eventually evolve into Cabal, Community Building, and Allyship Legion. So anyway, basically, all this drama is unfolding in the Ohio Facebook group. I got accused of gatekeeping and trying to determine who qualified for Sober Faction, and that was really never my intention, or I don't think that was the case. But that happened. They pretty much swore me off as a potential meeting facilitator for Ohio, like doing in-person meetings. They came up with an arbitrary rule that basically said they had to approve people from within and probably who were ministers. And I, at that point, was not a member of the now congregation. I'm not an ordained minister, and meanwhile, Sober Faction was kind of trying to patch things, I would say, more in my favor, where I could just run an in-person meeting regardless of what the congregation said. And that's where the hierarchy comes. There's like a weird thing about if your congregation is working with a campaign, the campaign kind of has say about how things go. The congregation kind of either agrees or doesn't. And they were setting arbitrary rules before Sober Faction even had protocols set up to do in-person stuff, and there was going to essentially be a clash of how that was going to turn out. Regardless, I stepped away from the Ohio group entirely and just devoted my time to Sober Faction. I've not regretted that choice. I still have friends who are or were involved in the Ohio congregation, some of them more at a watch and see what happens capacity, some of them on the outside looking in. I don't think I'm friends with anyone who's like specifically active with the group, which is funny because I seem to have gravitated towards people who had similar problems that I did with the way power was structured. And it comes down to lack of accountability, which is the problem that we're having in the past, week or so, with TST at large. So, to recap on some really petty drama that blew up bigger than it had to, Lucien Greaves was seen in a picture with Alex Silverman, who was ejected from the American Atheist Society for sexual misconduct and then grew into a transphobic bigot. His Twitter is full of transphobic shit. You can check it out. I am not going to link anything. I look at stuff like that as self-harm, to like actively find transphobes to read their shitty opinions. So I don't fight with people like that, and I don't subject myself to it. And the picture itself is not the problem, right? I agree with Lucien Greaves and people who defend him for the fact that he can't possibly vet every single person who stops into the Salem headquarters and asks him for a picture. That's 100% true. I agree with Lucien on that. I don't fight him on that. I don't fight him on the fact that the picture was taken. It's shitty that the picture was taken. Silverman is a shitty person. What I fight Lucien Greaves about, or theoretically, because we haven't actually had a conversation, he and I, is his response when trans people said, hey, like, this guy's a transphobe, instead of acknowledging that and either, disavowing isn't quite the right word, but instead of just acknowledging, like, hey, this is a shitty thing that happened, and, something to the effect of, like, any sort of accountability, like, we can try and see that this doesn't happen again. Instead, it was very much like calling the people who responded negatively to this picture and his responses about the picture being taken an angry mob and monsters. And those are direct quotes from his Twitter, as well as the podcast that he did on Stephen Bradford Long's Sacred Tension, that episode that I listened to a couple days ago. And that was kind of the tipping point for me for wanting to step away from TST entirely. What really just was the cherry on the icing was Sober Faction Council had a meeting because they were trying to figure out how to best move forward after they had put out several statements and made the focus of several of their meetings trans advocacy and defending and supporting trans people, where Lucien Greaves had failed to make anything. Another thing I agree with him on is blanket statements about, oh, we support the trans community and blah, blah, blah. It comes off as rainbow capitalism and virtue signaling and all of those sorts of negative connotations that people with positions of power tend to do to show that they're on our side so they can get something from us. He's right in that isn't always the best way to go, making a statement, on Instagram, Twitter, whatever. So, all of that being said, he said nothing except that the people who called him out were angry mob and were becoming the monsters that we claim that Silverman is. And then in this podcast, all things considered, it's two cis white guys talking about trans people who agree with them, which is tokenizing to the trans community. If your friend is making transphobic jokes and you say don't say that, and they go, I have a trans friend, that's tokenizing, and that's the sentiment here. I don't care. I still don't care that this picture was taken, because it happens, right? I'm not mad that the picture was taken. I'm mad that the response for the picture being taken was, well, shit happens, deal with it, from him. And then when we pushed back and said, what are you going to do about this? He basically said, well, nothing, because shit happens. The tenets of the Satanic Temple include the freedom to offend, right? The freedoms of others should be respected, including the freedom to offend. To willfully and unjustly encroach upon the freedoms of another is to forego one's own. We cannot force Lucien to step down, as some people have called for. We can't force him to apologize. We can't force him to make any statements or publicly, denounce Silverman in any of this. None of that can happen. We can't force him to do that. The problem, though, is that instead of any accountability being taken, just nothing happened at all. And it continued to get doubled down upon, that people like me who were mad about the situation and the way that it was responded to were angry mob, and we're monsters. And I think that's really fucking unfair. So last week, Sober Faction did a public forum that we named Molotov Mocktails. Anybody who knows anything about a mocktail knows there's no alcohol in it. It's a very edgy pun that we used to show that we're pissed off, our feelings are hurt, and we want the attention, right? That's, I mean, I'm not advocating for violence here, but when there's rioting, it's because people feel like they're not getting the fucking attention they need for a specific political issue. This was like the coyest and most snarky way that we could have said, you're not fucking paying attention to us. So Sober Faction, with me at the helm of this Molotov Mocktails forum, gave me the blessing to organize this panel. We had a bunch of trans folks talk about their experiences and their feelings, and to try and process. And then we opened the room up for people to speak on their experiences if they're from other congregations. Unfortunately, due to either short time for advertising or general unease maybe around the name, which we did get, people at the top were waving their fingers at us about it. Regardless, there wasn't a big population of people. I recognized most of the people in that forum as Sober Faction. That's a positive thing. But then it feels like we're preaching to the choir. So people who probably should have been in that meeting just to at least listen to us. And again, this was a meeting that we specifically said we're not advocating for violence. We want to talk about our experiences, and we want it to be specifically hearing from trans, gender non-conforming, two-spirit people, queer people who aren't cis, in general. This was the focus of the meeting, because we're the ones who are affected by the reaction of Lucien not giving a fuck that he ended up in a picture with a transphobe. We're the people who are affected by that. And again, I don't speak for the entire trans community. I've seen people online who are trans who don't agree with me and who do agree with Lucien, and that's fine. This is my opinion, that's theirs. We're not going to see eye to eye. We have this meeting. It pissed off a couple people, above the ranks of Sober Faction. As if by coincidence, yesterday around 5 in the morning Eastern time, well, could have been Pacific time. Regardless, it was really fucking early in the morning, and Sober Faction Council gets out of a meeting and learns that the Facebook group had been taken over by TST proper. There, a bunch of passwords to emails and Google Drives had been changed, and digital assets, our work and our data have been seized. And ultimately, they've made the decision to now separate from TST. So legally, we can't be called Sober Faction anymore. I don't know what the direction of that is going to take. I'm wearing a Sober Faction hoodie. I support the people I've been volunteering with for 3 years. The people who have physically and emotionally held me in some of my, worst times over the past couple of years. I'm with that community and how that evolves. And we will find a different way to attend the needs of recovery for people who don't align necessarily with AA or other 12 steps or, whatever. We're trying to bring that alternative the same way that we did when Sober Faction first started. Before it was TST, it was just Satanic Sober Faction. It started with 2 guys in Texas who were sick of feeling like they only had to do AA. They didn't jive with the 12-step God talk. They wanted something different, and they worked on it together, and then they brought it to a TST congregation, and that led them to other people in different congregations, and it all came together to this Facebook group that we had in 2020, where there were 200 of us at the time that I joined, with 0 meetings, and it was not on TST proper's roadmap at all. So anyone who's saying that Sober Faction is intellectual property of TST since its inception is specifically lying, and that's unfortunate because it's PR bullshit. They're trying to mitigate damage and paint this experience in their favor, and that's what people do, right? It's not true. We were Sober Faction before we were the Satanic Temple Sober Faction. There happened to be a lot of TST people involved, and it centered around working the program to align with the tenets of TST. When we got the blessing for the campaign to be officialized in 2021, that's when TST could claim, in my opinion, partial ownership of the Sober Faction. At this time, they're not going to allow us to use the imagery, which that's their logo. That's totally understandable. We can't use their Baphomet head. They won't allow us to use the Sober Faction name because they're taking control of the campaign. I disagree with that because I don't believe in intellectual property in that way. I believe that that is the sole property of the person who made it, and that I wasn't in that room. I'm not on council. I don't want to speak for any of them. But again, from the outside looking in, for Sober Faction to sign whatever paperwork that they had to saying that we will become a campaign of the Satanic Temple, that doesn't make it theirs. So what are we doing moving forward? Not a whole lot has been revealed yet. People are revoking their membership. I did today. It's July 1st, 2023. I'm no longer a card-carrying member of TST. I'm going to use my certificate to help in my legal name change, because I need to show some sort of external documentation that I've been using my current name. And that's going to be it. I've exhausted TST's usefulness to me. It reminds me of when I was at SatanCon, at the end of April. And someone on a panel said, like, TST is a means to an end for them. That's how I felt about it, kind of, since the beginning. I joined in 2015. That's when I bought a card and got my certificate. I got a second certificate a couple years ago because I wanted an updated one, and my card had been worn to hell from being in 7 different wallets. all of that being said, I'm happy for the times that I've had. They've been mostly positive. I've had very, pointed criticism at times where I was frustrated with Lucian or people in Ohio, or even sometimes in Sober Faction. I think I'm respected enough there to know that when I have a criticism, it's received positively because I care about these things. I care about these communities. TST has shown that they don't care about the opinions of the people they've hurt. They only care about the opinions of people who have agreed with them that we, the hurt, should shut up and get over it. And you're not protecting anybody. You're serving the people who continue to hurt us by saying it is my responsibility as someone whose feelings were hurt or triggered or any of the negative connotations you want to give to someone who's pissed off about a bad thing that happens. It's my responsibility to manage those emotions 100%. But I would like to think that the spokesperson of TST and the people working directly around and underneath him would maybe consider that so many people are pissed off and hurt that we should be asked about it and not simply pushed to the side because we don't agree with your handling of the situation. That doesn't make us inherently wrong. A lot of us tried to open discussions and they were ignored, and then they went on tape on this podcast to say that there were no efforts made to have discussions, when I know people in Sober Faction were emailing and texting and phone calling Lucian Greaves and saying, will you have this discussion with us and with our trans members who are hurting to have some sort of way forward with this? And instead it was maybe next week, and then we never heard from him again. So people did reach out. So anybody saying that nobody reached out is lying. Anybody saying that Sober Faction was specifically the intellectual property of TST and that it was always a TST thing is lying. And I'm really mad that I even have to say that. I've never been a part of a religion before, an organized religion. I've always practiced either, secular spirituality or individualistic, solitary paths when I did witchcraft and stuff in my teen and 20s. This is the first time that I joined an organized religion, and the first time I've had to leave one, and it feels about the same. Scary. I know that I have my community around me, so I'm going to be okay. I've made incredible friends and support systems within Sober Faction. I still have friends who are in TST. I don't shame anyone who is continuing to be involved with TST at the individual congregation, campaign level, and so forth. If you can do good things using TST as a vessel, please do that. But also know that when the time comes that there's dissent or criticism that they don't like, they can and will pull the plug. It's happened to congregations. It's now happening to the Satanic Temple Sober Faction. If I'm gonna tie this up all together, be careful where your allegiances lie. I am a trans person first. I'm an anarchist philosophically before anything else. Everything else that I align myself with is to further my goals towards creating a better, more just, more egalitarian, more equitable society for other people, regardless of color, race, gender identity, etc. And if TST is now one tool that I've used for the past several years to advance those efforts, and out of using that tool, I now have a much more progressive community to work with that's sober or in recovery, I should say. We'll talk about that another time, because recovery can include harm reduction and non-abstinence recovery and so forth. But all of that being said, I have a community around me who cares about the same things I do and is willing to work towards them. And to that end, I'm sticking around those folks because we now have a way forward. It's going to be a rocky start, just like it was with that 200 of us in the Facebook group 3 years ago. But I put my trust in the people who care about me and who care about my well-being, who's had my back with all of the petty dramas that I had when I was involved with Ohio, and who convinced me to move across the country from Ohio to now living in San Francisco. So all of that being said, I put my trust in the people who have proven that they care about me and they have my best interests in mind, and that we have the same goals for the work that we want to do for society, for our communities that we intersect with, and those that we don't. And I think that's so fucking important. So if you're going to take one good thing from this, find the people around you who are fighting for the same things, and move with them and build communities, because we can't do this alone. Whether that's being in recovery, I could never get sober on my own. I'm a total abstinence person. I cannot do that if I don't have people to rely on and call every so often and go to meetings. I can't do it alone. I can't do the work needed to try to build a fairer society if I don't have people around me. I'm going to have zero effect by myself. I can do all of those things because I have people who I work with, who I care about, who love me directly, within arm's reach. And I think that's so fucking powerful. So I don't really know how to sign this off. I'm still figuring this all out. I'm probably going to do more scripted ones in the future. This was kind of off the cuff. I just wanted to get some content out there and see how it feels to record. I've never done a video like this. I'll give you the kitschy, like, follow, subscribe, do all the buttons, and we'll see where this goes. I'm continuing to be a Satanist, just not a TST Satanist. I'm continuing to be a trans person. That will never change. I continue to be an anarchist. I continue to be a sober person in recovery, and I continue to work with the communities who have brought me in and with whom I have built this wonderful thing to go in a totally new direction towards the goals we want to achieve. Stay who you are, love who you are, love the people around you, find your people if you don't have them. They're out there, believe me. I didn't think I would have the type of people I do around me if you would have asked me that 5 or 6 years ago. I was totally lost. So having the people I have around me, having the trust in those people, knowing that they love me, knowing they have my best interests in mind, trying to put their best interests first for my own actions and thoughts, all of these things continue to push me forward. So that's it. I'm signing off.